This year has marked an extraordinary generosity of spirit from the Australian people. Millions have given to worthy causes, most notably in response to the bushfires earlier in the year. We should be grateful to all those that did. However, I've detected a global trend now emerging in Australia that's often used by the super wealthy to make a big deal of their donations, which often turn out to be somewhat different than originally portrayed. It started decades ago with CNN founder Ted Turner. He pledged $1 billion to the United Nations. He got headlines and an immediate tax break. Only the fine print revealed the donation was actually instalment philanthropy to be delivered over a decade. Still, it got the result because it got the UN on board his anti-population agenda. And the Gates Foundation, that receives many favourable headlines for their charity and in particular support for global vaccination programs. But few people know of the Gates' investment in the vaccine companies themselves. That means these billions in donations could actually turn into tens of billions in profits. Can anyone else see a conflict of interest here? At home, we're starting to see something similar. Philanthropy reached new levels of farce last week when Aussie billionaire Andrew Forrest was played like a propaganda puppet by the Chinese Communist Party at a press conference connected to his charitable foundation, Minderoo. The announcement was in actual fact and I quote, non-tendered government procurement contract worth $100 million. It had nothing to do with philanthropy at all. That's right, we, the taxpayer, are picking up the tab for Twiggy's latest grandstanding. Not to mention, we're all paying a much greater national price due to brazen support for the Chinese Communist Party propaganda machine. Now, that's not to undermine the very generous donations Minderoo has made over many years, but there are plenty of wealthy people who give generously to hundreds of causes without seeking public recognition. I know for a fact how generous Gina Reinhardt has been to many causes, and yet she's never summons reporters to a press conference to be applauded for it, nor has she been used as a propaganda tool by a foreign government in the process. Private giving reminds me of the biblical story where the wealthy made a big show of their alms, but the poor widow, giving what little she could, was declared by Jesus to have put in more than all the others. Aussies are like that. We give what we can, when we can, because we can, not because we want our name up in lights. Well, Stephen Conroy, you know the top end of town and you're a very modest man yourself. What do you have to say about showcase philanthropy?
Well, I think you're dead right, Cory. Twiggy really embarrassed himself significantly. I mean, each layer of what he was attempting to do became exposed, from the fact that he wasn't spending his own money because he was getting it back from the Commonwealth, to the fact that he used his Communist Party connections to secure the purchase, and then to turn up not once but twice with a Chinese Communist Party official to spruik what a great job China was doing, when there are so many questions still to be answered about how China suppressed information, jailed doctors who were trying to get the truth out there, and now are threatening Australia. I mean, he turned up with this bloke in the same week that their ambassador threatened Australia's economic future in breach of all international WTO rules. I mean, no one expects anyone to take China to the WTO, because the retribution you'll get for even thinking publicly about that, we're seeing now when we talk about a public inquiry. So China aren't planning on playing by the international rules that they have signed up to. And Twiggy just was shameless in promoting himself, and worse, promoting the Chinese Communist Party's cover-ups.
Well, Stephen, you've always had good sense in this subject. And Catherine McGregor, I'm really interested... Hang on, but before, I just want to go to Catherine, because Catherine has spent her life devoted to defence of this nation. And when you see a press conference dressed up as a philanthropic endeavour, ambushed at the invitation of someone who's actually getting repaid for the service they've provided by a communist agent, it must fill you with dread, Catherine.
Well, I'm a hawk on the China issue generally, Cory, as you know, and so does Stephen. I was disappointed in Twiggy because I hold him in good esteem. I think he has done some terrific philanthropic initiatives, but he got played this time, and this is the naivety and gullibility of our local business community, particularly those from Western Australia, which has a massive exposure to Chinese money. And, you know, Kerry Stokes isn't far behind him. They're credulous. They don't know what they're dealing with these people. And I thought it showed an incredible lack of good faith towards Minister Hunt that he blindsided him the way he did. Hunt's sense of betrayal was evident. And, you know, the way the PLA are major strategic players, no substantial globally exposed Chinese business does not have a link somehow to the party or the PLA. The old cliche in the Cold War, there are no Russian tourists. There are no innocent Chinese businesses abroad. And seeing that you started with scripture, I'll close with some as well, Cory. Verily I say to you, that is why it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. I think we saw that last week.
Well, thank you. Antoinette, do you think Andrew Forrest owes Minister Hunt and the country an apology?
Well, can I firstly acknowledge how incredibly uncomfortable I am that this evening you and Stephen have agreed twice on things.
It hurts me too.
I didn't expect, and something I just need to recover from. Look,
and we haven't even started on the ABC yet, Antoinette.
I'm waiting, Catherine. I'm waiting for that. Look, just more broadly on philanthropy, I think we don't have the philanthropic culture that, for example, the United States has. And we probably don't have the level of showmanship as well, and that could be a cultural thing. But also, perhaps we don't have as many.
Gotcha.
We probably don't have as many billionaires. What I'm more interested in terms of that showmanship and look how well I am doing is that often my scepticism comes from the amount of media attention and political gain that these billionaires have or attempt to have. When we look at Jeff Bezos, for example, in Amazon, he's pledged $10 billion towards climate change when Amazon's carbon footprint is huge. Similarly, we have got Zuckerberg, who started a foundation which also, within the foundation, if you look closely, allows for political donations and investments in other companies. So I am quite sceptical about that these billionaires often are trying to put money towards things that they created. But I do think some good work's been done. For example, with Bill Gates, there's been an enormous amount of money put towards global health and trying to, cure malaria. But it concerns me that, particularly seeing this pandemic, we look to this 1% of the population that owns 50% of the world's wealth instead of looking to our governments for solutions and answers. And I think that to me, more broadly than Twiggy or any individual, is a problem I have with billionaire philanthropists and just how much influence they have.
I'm not buying into the wealth redistribution argument that you might want to put forward, but I come to this point where I think that many are putting funds into tax-sheltered organisations called foundations.
I agree.
In order to indulge in some pursuits that are more commercial-oriented than others. You know, I saw an article the other day where a ship, a $100 million ship, was donated by one foundation to Global Ocean Research, and then it coincidentally was found parked off the coast of Western Australia where the family were holidaying with a giant inflatable water slide hanging off it. It's sort of strange, the credulity where you think that they're getting a break, they're looking for adoration or some other recognition, and then these are just used as personal assets or personal vehicles.
But then it does come back to But then it does come back to the argument of redistribution of wealth, because arguably they can do whatever they want with their billions. They don't have to start.
They can. No, but you see, this is the difference, that they put it into a foundation, it's tax protected. They don't pay interest or tax on the money in many cases, and it's been used for personal pursuits. And I think that is absolutely wrong. And last week when Twiggy had Mr. Forrest had his press conference, it was dressed up as a charitable philanthropic thing from Minderoo.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. He was getting $100 million from the government
I
repaid.
agree. But how can you then separate them from a broader discussion about redistribution of wealth and progressive
Because that's socialism. I don't want it. I'll raise socialism next week, and you can have a debate with me on that.
Well, I mean, then what's the answer other than being really disappointed in them and wanting to slap them with wet lettuce on the wrist?
Well, it goes back to...
I didn't know you could do it by instalments.
My essential point. My essential point is that giving makes you feel good because you give. And it doesn't matter whether you can give $50 million or you can give $5. The act of giving what you can when you can has essentially always been a private endeavour. And that has been, I think, one of the hallmarks of true philanthropy. And I know some very wealthy people who do above and beyond and never, ever seek accolades or press conferences for it or applause. Sure, they might name a building after them, or they might get different thank yous in other ways, but they don't do it for the grand gesture in the public field. They do it because they want to. And I think we need to return to that. And Australians are very generous people, very, very generous, and they don't seek accolades.
Well,
Catherine, I can hear you.